I think that's we've certainly achieved critical mass. So I think if we were in an actual conference hall right now, there'd be a fire marshal barring the door and starting a waiting list or starting a lineup outside. So I think that's enough for us to kick off, and we'll just welcome everyone else in who's joining the session in the coming minutes. Welcome everyone, and to what is a truly extraordinary ICEF Berlin. I think it's safe to say that Berlin is a really important marker for all of us during the year, and so we're especially grateful that you could join us for this afternoon's webinar. We're going to focus today on the future of the English language teaching sector, and I'm going to avoid using the word unprecedented as much as possible during the session, but it's suffice to say that language travel has been disrupted this year to an extent and on a scale that we have never seen before. We're going to consider some of those impacts today, and for the most part, we're going to take a longer view, look ahead to try and understand how the events of this year might influence the shape of the industry over the next decade. None of us, I can speak for myself and my colleagues, none of us are professional fortune tellers, but there are certainly a number of prominent threads that run through most discussions about the ELT sector. And what we're going to do today really is just pull on some of those threads and see what they can tell us about how the industry might look a decade from now. If we haven't had a chance to meet before, I'll just say quickly that I'm Craig Riggs. I'm the editor of ICEF Monitor, and I and the rest of the editorial team at Monitor have spent our days this year, as I'm sure you all have, trying to understand how the market is adapting and responding to the pandemic, how we're all moving forward. If you're not already a regular Monitor reader, it is my sworn duty to invite you to visit icefmonitor.com today to subscribe for free email alerts to our ongoing coverage as we continue to learn and to find our way through this. Much more importantly, I'm delighted to introduce the distinguished panel that we have for our discussion today. We have, distinguished in part by his ICEF badge, we have Robin Adams, who is the president of CES North America, and he's joining us from Toronto. Thanks, Robin, for coming today. We also have Lawrence Jackson, who is the head of sales for IH London. That's where we found him this afternoon. And then we have Jean-Marc Alberola, who is the president of Bridge Education, and he's joining us from Denver. Thank you all for joining us and for sharing your insights with the audience today. And speaking of the audience, I'd like to invite everyone to share any questions or any issues that you like in the chat for our session. We'll do our best to tackle any that we can during our time this afternoon. And if we run out of time, we'll follow up with you afterwards by email or with any questions that we couldn't answer during our live window. So we're going to spend most of this hour in an open discussion with the panel. But I'd first like to ask each of our panelists just to weigh in for a couple of minutes on what you see as the most enduring impact of the pandemic on the ELT sector in particular. And really just that is the factor or the factors that you think will most influence the industry in the coming decade. Lawrence, would you like to start us off on that one this afternoon?
Sure. Thanks, Craig, much appreciated. So, I mean, there are many enduring factors. I think depending on where you're sat, you could have a very different viewpoint, especially given that we're a global industry with a vast range of customers from all over the world. I think what our experience that we've drawn over the last 6 months has been a question of relevance, essentially. So ELT as a sector is relevant when you're able to combine non-essential education in language, well, depending on which way you look at it, but non-essential education to learn a language and combine that with culture and access to different environments. Yeah. When you strip out one of those variables, being the travel, what do you have left? Do you have a product that remains viable and relevant to your audience, to your students? So what what my perception of the last 6 months has been, what do we have in our product arsenal, or what do we have in terms of our offering for students, and how can it be slightly adapted to make sure that it is relevant, the new climate? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of, I think, one of the most pertinent factors that we needed to consider. So it's redefining what students want from us and how can we best provide it. And where we found there to be a real need is less in the, but more in the way of providing outcome-led education. So whereas a general English course can, help you move through particular levels, it's not really a desired or a designated outcome at the end of the program. So courses where a particular qualification has been, studied, a teacher training qualification, for instance, or achieving a particular IELTS score or a Cambridge assessment, a Cambridge English score, have been more popular, whereas your typical study travel, combining general English in the morning with shopping in the afternoon, obviously is less popular. So redefining that space and finding a relevant product, I think, for our students is possibly the most enduring factor that we need to consider.
Really interesting. So just a real sharpened focus on student requirements, student needs, exactly, and what their goals are. Yeah, interesting. Jean-Marc, how about from your perspective? Is there anything you would add to that in terms of the factors that you see being the most durable?
Yeah, I think in terms of enduring impact, I think there's been acceleration of two things. Acceleration of e-learning and online learning, some estimates by like 10x. Yeah. And I think that's an opportunity, but for English language travel, not such a good thing. And if you look at the context of English language training, the industry as a whole, it's something like 50 billion in revenue a year, 2 billion students. And then if you look at the estimates for language travel, it's like 3.5 billion or 7% of that. And I think what we're seeing is how the global ELT market influences our language travel sector. It has been for a long time. Maybe we didn't realize it, but we saw it was manifested in shorter weeks. It was manifested with students arriving at higher levels of English proficiency. It was manifested in them looking for other things other than just English plus. And so this is just a case when you go to the online space where it's an opportunity for that larger ELT market to chip away at market share at those lower proficiency levels for the language travel industry. So I think there is an opportunity maybe for online at the end of the cycle of learning, and we can talk about that later. But generally, I think for the language travel, it's a stopgap measure. It's not the value proposition of language travel to do online. Some may see it as an opportunity, and I think they can throw their hat in the ring in what is increasingly a fragmented space. But that's for them. And I think the second acceleration is a market correction. We've talked about this industry being, prior to COVID, mature, commoditized. With oversupply. Sometimes, personally, I have to speak for myself. I felt like sometimes, at the last ICEF Berlin that I was at, kind of like almost like, I hate to say it, like a zombie, like The Walking Dead, in the sense that I knew that the marketplace was just so competitive. We were all, fighting for students and commission rates going up. And so I think we're going to see this acceleration of a correction in the market. It's kind of cruel to say this, but if we want to be, ready to set the stage for a healthy comeback, there has to be a market correction. That means that some schools are going to disappear, and there'll be a supply that meets the demand more accurately. So that's the second enduring impact I see.
Yeah. Wow. So on the one hand, you're sort of you're conceptualizing the marketplace like in a couple of different ways. Like there's a role of online learning for a certain type of student, and there's a role of in-person learning for a certain type of student. But then you're also seeing a kind of structural change in the marketplace as well. Yeah.
In a sense that I just see English language travel as very unique in its value proposition. It can't be emulated by others if you're learning language in your country at a language school or online. And so that's what makes it special. And I think it's kind of what Lawrence was saying. So you can go online and look for other things, but I think, again, it's stopgap for this industry. So it will come back, and we want to see that. But it needs to come back. There'll be some changes for sure, but I think it needs to come back, and we need a healthy recovery. And I think that the longer this occurs, the more centers will close, and the smaller the marketplace. You might have to roll back the industry, 10 years to see what it will look like when it emerges again post-pandemic. We're prepared to not open even as late as the fall of 2021, realistically.
Yeah. I should say by way of context, because we were talking about this earlier, that you made the decision to close your school in the spring, really, when the first lockdowns were starting, and you're not anticipating that you'll reopen until, as you say, even into fall next year.
Yeah, that's right. Because operating at a lower volume below break even costs more than being closed. And so this is about surviving, preserving cash, and being ready for another day when the market recovers. Yeah,
gotcha. Okay. And Robin, going to you for your view on this as well. What's the long-term takeaway from our experience this year?
Yeah, I think that what we're going to see is sort of a definition of, the first 2 years after sort of the end of the pandemic. I see that being a certain type of student, maybe more academically focused, micro-credentials, picking up on where Lawrence was going on. And then, after that 2-year period, then we may start seeing the travel, the discretionary travel market come back again. Hard to say whether that will be in the same sort of volume that we've seen in the past. It may be to a more elite client that chooses to have that non-essential travel experience. But definitely I see the academic focus, a greater interest in pathway programs, which would be good for Jean-Marc. And I also see, in the Canadian context, the recent announcement from the Ministry of Education or Ministry of Immigration suggesting that about 400,000 immigrants will be taken over the next 3 years per year. So we should see a surge in people that are interested in immigration as the outcome that Lawrence was talking about. So yeah, definitely I see the initial section being more interested in academic type programs, and then perhaps the trend for the more leisure focused will start to return after a few years.
Interesting. So you're thinking relevance as well, and sort of student goals, and that those students that are interested in pursuing a qualification, whether that's a full academic qualification or some other type of micro-credential or alternative qualification, those are the students that are going to drive demand, and that may be connected to immigration goals for some students as well. So where does that take us then in terms of how program delivery is likely to change over these in the years ahead? I mean, Jean-Marc, you were talking about the pandemic as an accelerator in terms of adoption of online learning and the role of online learning. I guess that's an obvious takeaway from our experience this year. But whether with respect to online learning or otherwise, like, how do you see program delivery changing in the sector going forward?
Well, I think on online, I think there is an opportunity. It's going to become more mainstream, and students are going to be looking for that. It's going to be a mode that they probably have been learning before they decide to go on a language travel experience. I think the opportunity for language travel is as a post purchase. So as a student goes to the school and you establish a relationship, there's an opportunity to extend the lifetime value of that customer, maybe by 2 times, by offering them online instruction after that experience. You'd have to compete with the global marketplace and the pricing that's out there for online, but you do have an advantage. They know your quality. You've established a relationship with them. I think that's it. So I think there's an opportunity online to extend the value of the customer that way. I think pre-study, that's a whole different challenge has to go with cost of customer acquisition. I don't see that as the sweet spot. So I think that might happen. But I think in terms of program delivery, this industry has always depended more and more on government regulation. We're at the whim of government, geopolitical, and particularly as it pertains to student worker rights and immigration. And that exodus of students, at least from the US market perspective, to Canada exemplifies that. And so if you want to see a change or a flux in terms of program, we in the US, the industry piggybacked off higher ed, and we went on pathway programs. And so anytime we can piggyback off government regulation, immigration, and student work rights, that's kind of the play we've had, and I think that will continue. So I think it's interesting that we're at a milestone here in the U.S. because we have an election tomorrow, and
We've heard of it.
Yes, if the pendulum swings, you could see, if it's extended, a return of that welcoming voice to international students, and potentially even immigration and working rights, which would really put some pressure on the Canadian market, again, which hasn't been there for a long time. And so it's like we talked about before, this sense of this international student mobility around ELT being an amoeba, and it moves around. So it migrated over to Canada, but it can just swing right back to the US or Australia or the UK, depending on which country is offering the best terms around that space.
Oh, that's interesting. So you're thinking about those big public policy levers, like visa policy, post-study work options or settlement options.
Yeah, it used to be our bread and butter was language training in itself, because the opportunities for language training in country weren't that great. But now the ELT industry is this huge industry of fragmented learning with apps, online learning. So we really depended on really a language travel tourism experience, or, again, piggybacking off these other opportunities where it was social mobility, students coming from middle class, looking to get work experience in English, happy to work as a waiter in a restaurant, et cetera, and work their way up, and maybe work towards immigration or study long-term in the US, get OPT. So that's kind of where we found our raison d'etre, so to speak.
Yeah. And Lawrence, you've had some pretty important changes in the UK in terms of visa policy and options for students in the country. Do you see a direct relationship between that type of policy development and how schools are delivering programs and the types of programs they're delivering in the UK?
Yes and no. I mean, in honesty, the demand for online, whether or not it's governed by government policy, is I'm not sure it is. I think for certain, for face-to-face, if we want to see a sharp uptick in numbers, and we're not in control of, if we're not driving that ourselves, if we're relying on government policy, then the focus for us should be essentially what is relevant and who is buying it. I mean, in terms of online, what we're finding is that it's about what's just in time. So just in time, the cycle has changed in how somebody chooses to buy, the product or the service. The lead-in times have kind of have shortened quite dramatically. So policy on the government side, I think, has a direct impact on the face-to-face learning, but less so on how it impacts on the online side of things.
Well, what do you think about that, the role of online going forward? I mean, I thought, Jean-Marc, you were going to go the other way on that and say, like, online could be, you could front load the student experience with some online delivery in their home countries and then bring them into the country. Is that, but that's an interesting idea, that more the other way around. It's like a value add for after their experience of in-person instruction, they can continue learning after they leave the school. Is that your view as well, Lawrence, or do you see a different role for online?
I think it very much depends on what it is. So if it's just general English, then perhaps it's not as relevant. I think what Jean-Marc said in terms of it being part of the value add makes sense. I think the online proposition is something which is pre and post, and possibly during, where you are seeing a continual change in legislation as to schools being able to operate face-to-face lessons. As a standalone product, I see it as something which will succeed where there is a definitive outcome. But where it's more recreational, more about the study travel aspect, then it's not a standalone course in my view. It's something which you build into the entire learning experience for the student, allow them to start their journey earlier on in the, in their, I guess, in entire learning journey, and possibly cap it off towards the end so that you've got a comprehensive offering for the student. But from the perspective of the provider, we see online as being a route to market where there is a particular defined outcome for the student, and that's something that they cannot possibly at this given moment in time do without. So it makes sense. If you look at universities, they're switching online, and their numbers have grown. There's a need, a real need, for those students to continue with their university studies. Is there a real need for a student to continue with their plans to study in San Diego or in London or in Dublin on a language course during a pandemic? Possibly not. Are there other courses which are particularly, may be seen as particularly more relevant or more appropriate for a student that could be delivered online? Yes. So I think it very much depends on the audience and what is being delivered as to online being a tool which is used primarily for the delivery of that course, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does indeed. And Robin, what's the view from Canada? Like we're just getting to the point where schools can welcome new students from outside the country, of course. And is that, through that factor or otherwise, what do you see as the role of online now for Canadian providers?
No, it's interesting. I think that what Jean-Marc and Lawrence were talking about in terms of the impact of government plays very much into that situation with the Canadian situation, the Canadian context, where it's quite feasible that you'll have a surge of applications for visas. There could be a tremendous backlog in the process. It's certainly something that was addressed in the October 30th announcement that they're looking at automating the process a little bit more. But until that happens, I suspect more schools will be looking at hybrid models, some way of including students maybe before they arrive. And there I'm a little bit different from what Jean-Marc was saying. I can see more students starting their courses before they receive the visas, and then joining the programs once they arrive in Canada. So at the International Association of Language Centers, we're definitely spending a lot of time looking at the hybrid model and how to do that effectively with multiple cameras and training of instructors and that sort of thing. But definitely, I think that the online component will be a legacy of the pandemic, perhaps something that we were all talking about how to use the tool more effectively before March of 2020, but then we were all sort of forced into it, after that time. But I do see it staying on at some point, being used to a certain extent, but I agree with my colleagues that effectively or essentially our product is an experiential one, and I think that a lot of our agents that distribute our programs sell that experience experience. And so that very much shapes, the kind of clients that we receive, is how they've been prepared by the very important counseling that's being done prior to the arrival at the schools.
Yeah.
I think Robert makes a really interesting point there, actually, because we've just considered this from the perspective of the provider and less so from the perspective of the channel which distribute the courses, being the agents. And like Jean-Marc said, with an online program, possible deregulation in terms of providing that, squeezing ever thin margins even further and letting the market dictate the price, you're arriving at a program or a range of courses which are a lot lower in value than a traditional face-to-face offering. And that doesn't necessarily inspire a great deal of confidence in terms of the agent channel, given that they're working on a commission basis. You could raise your commissions if you saw fit, but ultimately then you're struggling with the margin side of things. So online has its relevance not only with the audience that are buying it, but also those who are selling it. So it possibly sits in a model which is more direct to market rather than via a third party or a tertiary, depending on your structure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Hey, Lawrence, that's exactly one of the points that I was trying to bring up, and that's kind of why I was kind of lukewarm on online being a pre-experience and more post, because there's that $50 billion ELT global market, and students already have tons of options for online language training. We operate in other countries locally, and I can tell you that even in the fragmented, even the smallest schools offer online training. Private teachers offer online training in the teacher marketplaces where students are being matched with teachers and disintermediating schools. Those are those opportunities. They see that. When they look to us in language travel, it's like Robin said, that experiential product. And so you haven't built a relationship. They're not looking to you for an online experience. They're looking to you for that experiential product. And so that's why I think like you pointed out, the agents see it that way as well. Many are like, hey, I'm in this market. I'm doing the B2C selling to the consumer. And I can tell you, this is going to be a real challenge. But once you've had them in and you've had that experience, and we all know how much the students love it and how transformational what we provide is, you've got a great opportunity to hang on to that student for some extended life. And I think that's where that online, and I think they're willing to pay even a little bit of a premium over what they would normally for that online. So that's where I'm coming from when I say I think it's post as opposed to pre opportunity.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great insight actually, and it makes a lot of sense when you lay it out that way. What about? So that there's that aspect of just the supply side of online learning or in-country provision in the students' home markets, like as the numbers you gave us earlier demonstrate really well. The marketplace is vast beyond the sector that's concerned with language travel. But we have been talking a lot over the last several years about the commodification of language study, essentially, whether online or off, and how that translates to the intense competition for students across the marketplace. Now, especially after the experience of this year, as we're all looking ahead to a recovery in the industry and the longer term beyond that, what are the strategies for schools going forward? Robin, maybe you'd like to pick that one up, just in terms of what you see as some of the important opportunities that are available to schools now as we move into recovery and after. I think we've probably touched on some of the important themes already, but I'm sure you can expand on that.
Yeah, sure. I think that, we'll definitely see a period of consolidation, and, schools that have the cash reserves, or as our CEO, Justin Quinn, likes to refer to it as the runway, that the schools with long enough runway will seize opportunities. There's no question about that. But I do see also sort of this increased specialization. Jean-Marc referred to, the increasing English language proficiency levels that are, global. And, I think that there will be more students looking for a very specific type of experience and credential that will be necessary for them in their home country context or in an immigration context. So I think schools will be forced to explore, what area of specialization will get them the maximum return. And that's going to be the difficult factor is finding something that will have enough volume to make it worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. Is that where kind of differentiation strategy meets program development? Like, do you expect, there have been a couple of references to micro credentials and alternative credentials in our discussion today. Like, do you expect to see language schools, language training providers more directly involved in delivering other types of qualifications as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think it's going to be very important to engage agents and to survey students as well and try to figure out, what are the trends that students require, and how do we facilitate their access to these credentials. But I definitely think that the days of, simply delivering general English type programs, I think those will be, schools will continue to do that, but it won't be necessarily the largest section of their revenue stream.
Mm-hmm. So, programs or credentials that lead to some academic qualification or preparing the students for academic study are perhaps one example of that. There's also been a lot of discussion about teacher training and the teacher training programs that are provided by schools. I think, Jean-Marc, you're heavily involved in teacher training at Bridge. Lawrence, you are as well at IH. It sounds like you're both seeing some growth in that area this year as a sort of differentiated programming from other English programs that you're delivering at your schools. Is that the case?
A little bit on this idea of differentiation. I'd say that I kind of agree with Robin. I think the key is specialization moving forward. I think we didn't do a really good job of differentiating in our industry. We're really close knit, and we were all pretty much doing the same thing. And as we got more commoditized and got more competitive, we started offering more and more things. Everyone was doing juniors, everyone was doing executive. Summer programs, 50 plus, English plus soccer, test prep, university pathways. Yeah, we've got it all on our menu. It was like a restaurant that offered every type of ethnic food possible. I think it's hard to say, and it's really a bold move, and these opportunities might play out later. Is if schools really focus on specialization. It's hard to do in a tough marketplace like that. But if you find your minimum viable audience, and you say, look, we do summer camps super well, and that's what we're going to do. And we're just going to be open for the summer, and we're going to run all our business. And agents will know, this is, summer camps, this is the people we go to. Executive, these are the guys. It makes it easier for the marketplace. So I like to see some more specialization. I think there'll be some innovation occurring with technology and the value add. We've seen some schools offering digital marketing and entrepreneurship programs and things. I think that's creative, and I think to the extent that those can be online, hedge their bets and kind of make them a little bit more immune from the language travel sector, which can be very volatile, as we see. We're like the travel industry, so we're very susceptible to economic flus or whatever else is going on out there. In terms of language, in terms of teacher training, that's always been an area we've been involved in at Bridge. And there's different segments. There's the teach abroad segment, we call it, the gap year. And it's always been counter-cyclical. So if the economy's down, people looking for alternative forms of employment and teaching English is seen one as native speakers have a shoe-in because they're native. But really going back to this $50 billion ELT industry, our play on teacher training is really more global. And we're catering to non-native English-speaking teachers, which are the bulk. They're 80% of the teachers are Brazilians teaching English or Chinese teaching English. So we've been focusing a lot on that. So it's a little bit atypical from we think of these, these English-speaking country domestic markets for pre-service training. Our take on it is a little different, so we've been acting a little different.
Yeah. So again, that's another segment that you can sort of parse in different ways for more specialized delivery. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Is, one of the aspects of increasing competition that we hear a lot about is just the cost of acquiring a new student and the pressure on the different recruitment channels that schools are working in, right? It's the rising cost of acquiring a new student, both for schools and for agents. And agents, of course, continue to play a huge role in the sector in language travel. There's been a lot of discussion this year about how agents and schools can work together more effectively. And at the same time, we see a lot of new digital channels emerging that both agents and schools are making use of. I mean, where's the marketplace going in terms of recruitment? Robin, when you look at the toolbox for recruitment these days, like where's your focus?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really interesting question, Craig, because that really has been a big part of the ICEF events in November is sort of getting the various proposals together and looking at how you were going to structure your marketing budgets for the year ahead. But I think that schools, are certainly going to be more careful in terms of which investments they make. And I think that schools and agents will have to work very strategically in terms of ensuring that they're looking at the digital channels closely and perhaps sharing the costs of those investments. But I certainly think that, the days of making upfront investments, those are probably going to be more challenged, and schools and agents will be looking at longer term relationships and the loyalty that has been built up on both sides, and make agencies looking at schools that have delivered consistently and ensured that students were happy for their selections of which schools they're going to work with, and then for schools to look at opportunities where they're going to get the best returns. So those conversations are going to be very, very important and happening over the next little while.
Yeah. How about you, Lawrence? What's the landscape look like in terms of recruitment?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously being at an ICEF event where it's the very reason that we're here is that we have partnerships with agents that have worked with us for many years, and we continue to service the relationship between one another. And I think ELT has long since been a business, if you like, that has been quite cash rich. So, the money comes in quite freely. There's never really an issue with cash flow with businesses in ELT, and they've been quite quick to spend on the marketing side, and possibly in some ways quite speculatively, not really looking at return on investment, possibly just looking at things in terms of fear of missing out. So I must be listed in this brochure because my competitor is, and I've got to be at this event because they are. I think everybody's seen a tightening of the purse strings. They're starting to apportion their budgets, a lot more sensibly. Like Robin says, they're planning with greater scrutiny, for the year ahead. So there's already the reaction is already to start looking at things in more granular detail in terms of what makes sense and what is, financially realistic in terms of investing. The agent channel is the fastest route to market. So obviously, you need to continue to service that. But I think the more speculative means of recruitment from the schools and agent side will contract. Agents will be looking to offer, more, I think, slightly more detailed proposals as what it is that they can offer their partner schools in terms of a marketing solution rather than an advert in a brochure, for instance, which might have been popular 10 years ago. So I think there'll be a sharpening of the tools that are in the drawer from both sides to ensure that whatever the dollar spend is, it's meeting, you know, a particular objective. It's measurable, and it's, you know, it's sustainable, and that's kind of what everybody's seeing. We're also probably more focused on looking at, you know, the direct route to market as well. So, you know, there's especially if you're looking at a dual product being online and face-to-face, possibly the agents aren't engaging so much on the online courses that you have. If you have them as a standalone, the route to market there is direct. So, you know, being a bit more adept on the marketing side of things, using other third parties which service the industry, you know, other tertiary hubs for promoting your courses, and developing your own, you know, marketing strategies. So I think it's twofold in approach, but the common theme is spending less and getting more value for your money. I think that's kind of the approach that all the schools are taking. I think the agents are very much on board with that in terms of providing a better solution.
Mm-hmm. So another kind of market correction there, really, in terms of a rationalization of marketing spend.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily, I don't see it as a bad thing in any way. I mean, it's great to have a bottomless pit in terms of your marketing budget to spend as you see fit. And sometimes it is easy just to attend something because you know your competitor is doing so. But as we, you know, move with the times, the status quo changes, and I think it does everybody a favor to be a little bit more joined up in their thinking, especially when you have, like Jean-Marc says, you know, an oversupply in terms of the providers and a contracting in demand. You know? So you really have to you know, narrow your focus a great deal more.
I would say the following: if you know, the question in terms of the cost of acquisition. The cost of acquisition on the B2C side, of the consumer direct, is really high, and that's been the burden of agents to do that. We as Language Travel, we really sell B2B, and B2B in the sense that we're selling to agents. Agents are the customer facing, and that's very costly to do, and we depend on agents for that. And I think what we're seeing is, yes, schools will say, "Oh, we're getting increased bookings, direct bookings." Really, in a sense, what's happening is it still depend on the agent, because when a language school intercepts a student direct booking, it's at the bottom of the marketing funnel. It's when the students are already past their awareness stage, engagement, they're ready to buy, and they're typing in the search engine, English school in London, and they're looking and they make the purchase. But prior to them reaching that stage, they may have learned about the opportunity of learning and going to a language school from an agent at a fair. And so in a sense, you say, you know, that is a little bit, the fact is we are poaching those students in a large degree from the agent. And I think, and moving forward, we depend on agents. It's what's worked well. And I think there's an opportunity because I don't think it's possible to go into the consumer markets in all globally. And that's been tried. It can't be done. You could maybe go to a few select markets and say, I'm gonna have my own representation there, but global reach, you couldn't do it. I think there's an opportunity. Channel partner relationships and management is something that's mainstream in business in general. I think like Microsoft, 95% of their sales are through channel partners. Yeah, I think we could do a better job in the industry of professionalizing the way we work with that, and make those relationships stronger. And we get to a stage where we work with fewer agents. And again, this works in a corrected marketplace. And, you know, you could see a stage where you're getting a referral from Turkey, you know, and you're bouncing it back to your agent as recognition. But then at the same time, as that happens, your commission rates are going to go down lower as well, because they went astronomical. They got so high that they kind of ruin the business from a gross margin perspective. You can't be paying 40% commission and have a viable business with a gross margin of 30 after teacher costs. So I think there's an opportunity to double down on agents, and we should all work to make it more professional. I think ICEF can probably play a role in educating us and getting us there to work and establish agent relationships in a way that's done on a larger scale. I know some of the bigger schools and chains already do that with their agent portals and the way they manage them, but I think that can be done for smaller schools that are specialized as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really interesting points. I mean, I think when people talk about cost of acquisition, they're thinking about both of those things that you're talking about. One is that the cost burden that's borne by agents in terms of that direct-to-consumer marketing effort in their markets, and also the rising commission rates, that are present in many channels. Robin, what do you think in terms of opportunities for greater efficiency in recruiting going forward? I mean, where do those lie?
I mean, it's an interesting question because the sales process is not one that can necessarily be completed through automation alone. Mm-hmm. So I think that one does need to recognize that the role of the agent is critical. Their closure rates are not in the 50-60% ranges, right? So there's when you're looking at commission rates, you have to factor how many sales weren't completed and closed. And I think that's why it is extremely challenging for schools to have a global distribution system that doesn't intimately connect agents and involve agents in that process. Mm-hmm. So I think that schools are going to be working more closely with agents, and I think we all owe ICEF a debt of gratitude in terms of being able to have the platform where we can engage. And I think we've all had that experience at Marlene's bar where the relationship was brought to a much closer level, and it's yes, we're doing things on Zoom now, but only because we had that previous experience. I think it'd be much more difficult to engage those relationships now through a virtual environment. So it is very important that we have that history of having that shared experience at an in-person event, and that will pave the way for those kinds of conversations that Jean-Marc is talking about, because they're not easy to have, and if you're sort of having them in a colder context, a non-in-person structure, it's very difficult to get there, I would think.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Also, I think there's room, on the school side to, going back to looking at the innovation side of things. We've got it in our heads that we deliver a particular service to students, and that's it. But there are plenty of other avenues for us to explore to add value, not just for the student, but also in terms of the value of the booking. And the value of the booking then would have a knock-on effect in terms of the commission earnings. Schools have they have a captive audience of individuals that are studying with them. There are additional services that those students could require on campus or on site, additional tuition that they might need to help them meet their goals, additional services that would enable their stay to be at an institution more comfortable.
What types of things are you thinking of there, Lawrence?
Well, I mean, if we were looking at, let's say you had a more developed online offering that was pre and post and during, potentially it's a more developed LMS, learner management system, which enables the student to access materials in a way that they need to. There's many different things that could be explored, but to really capitalize on them, it means honest and frank discussions with our partners, with our agents, to determine what is it that those students want, where do we feel there to be an opportunity in terms of upselling those services to our students, and what's the knock-on effect in terms of your commission end. So The combination, like the rising cost of acquisition is a fact, but with a newly modified and more innovative product and service, potentially there's room to add, a little bit extra in terms of the invoice value. So it's very much dependent on where you're at in terms of being able to offer additional services, if you have services to offer. But there's a discussion that can be had there, for sure.
Yeah, really interesting. So I mean, it's sort of it's picking up on the theme of relevance again, and finding efficiency by adding more value to the booking. Yeah,
and it could be as simple as just asking your students to extend.
Right.
I imagine many schools don't do it, and even if they did and they received an extension, would they credit that sale then to the agent? Who knows?
Right.
But having a clear, policy that's transparent to the student and to the agent, and helping to sell additional services once the journey has been begun, will benefit both parties. It just takes a little bit more thought.
It strikes me as we talk our way through this that one of the points that is reflected here is just how central those relationships are to the work that we're all doing. The partnerships that you have within your schools, between your school and agents or other partners in the marketplace. And we can probably all agree that that's something that's not likely to change. In an environment of considerable change, as we've been discussing, those relationships, I think we've always held them to be extremely valuable and central to our work, and that certainly seems like something that will be enduring as we move forward this next decade. One of the things that I've been hearing a lot in my discussions around the industry is just how intense and frequent those communications between schools and agents and schools and other partners have been throughout this throughout the challenging months that we've had this year. I'm wondering, as you look ahead now, are there any new types of partnerships that you see on the horizon, or new ways of working within those relationships? Like it sounds to me like you're, from a discussion that we're having, that we're imagining that some of the investments there are rationalized, that there's more strategic choices and specialization in the marketplace. But I mean, beyond that, do you see a different way of working between schools and agents or other types of partnerships in the industry?
I think the secret sauce of this industry has been this relationship. It's kind of in our DNA, this international group getting together at ICEF events. You've been a big catalyst, ICEF, in this. But you see, organizations like Alto and Yolk and International House as examples of that camaraderie. And I think that's what makes the industry special. So I think that being the secret sauce, we're going to want to continue with that. I think where there's an opportunity is to expand the channel partners to a broader. We think of our channel partners as being exclusively agents, but as you see a fragmented market, I think there's opportunities to have channel partnerships with others. It could be private schools, it could be teacher marketplaces, it could be teachers, anywhere where there's a touch point with the English language student, where eventually there may be a phase where they want to have that in-country experience. If you're at that touch point, those can be advocates for you, and those could be channels for our schools. So bringing in a more diverse group of channel partners to the party, I think, could be a next step.
Yeah, really interesting. How about for you, Robin? Is there anything like on your radar as you look forward?
I would agree with Jean-Marc. I would say that an affiliate model will have a greater role going forward. So associations like the International Association of Language Centers, IAH, you'll see perhaps more cross-selling between schools. But also to touch on something that Lawrence mentioned, LMS, sort of learning management software, I see that as having a greater role as language schools move towards specialization and differentiation, frontline counselors won't necessarily be able to rely on sort of a vanilla model anymore, that they're going to need to have that very specific training, and certainly an LMS system can facilitate that.
Yeah, really interesting. There's a lot. When we started to frame out this session, we cautioned ourselves that these were all hefty topics, and we would do well to chew through them over the course of the hour. But our hour is about to run out, so I think I've just had a little digital poke on the shoulder to remind me that we need to wrap up so that folks can get to their next appointments during Berlin. So I think on that note, I'm just going to take the opportunity to thank the panel, Jean-Marc and Lawrence and Robin, for taking the time to join us the session today, and for really sharing some important insights with us for some of the really fundamental characteristics and considerations that we're all going to have now as we move forward into this recovery after pandemic and into the years after that. I think you've really set out some really important points for all of us. And I think, those issues of relevance and specialization and adding value back into the process for students and for agents and for other partners are really some of the key takeaways for us today. So I think to close us out on time and allow everyone to rush to their next meetings down the digital hallways, we should leave it there for today. But thank you very much. I'll say as well that we did receive questions in the chat today, and some of which we didn't address in our discussion, and I'll just say to those that left questions in the chat that we'll absolutely follow up with you afterwards by email to make sure that those are addressed. Big thanks to everyone for coming to the session today. We had quite a great crowd in the digital room, and a big thanks to Jean-Marc and Lawrence and Robin for joining us and for making up a great discussion. Thanks everybody, and enjoy the rest
Craig,
of
for the opportunity.
Thanks, Craig.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah.
Bye for now. See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.